Sorry. Oh, it said what I said.
Oh.
Okay. So today is still January the 14th, and we have the State Department of Assessment and Taxation with us. We have Director Dan Phillips. We have Deputy Director Bob Yeager. We have the State Tax Sale Ombudsman Maria Smith, and we have the Deputy Program Manager for Homeowner Protection Program, Cherie Williams. And I will let you all come forward and introduce yourselves. Welcome, Director. I think this is the first time you're here before us in your role. So let's give him a Ways and Means welcome. And I'll just let you all take it away in whatever order you would like to do, and then we'll have questions after the entire presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dan Phillips. I'm the Director for the Department of Assessments and Taxation. With me today, I have Bob Yeager, who's our Deputy Director. Maria Mathias, where's Maria?
Right here.
Right here. Our Associate Director, and she oversees more of our business, personal property, our charter divisions, working with them. Our Tax Sale Ombudsman, Marie Smith, is here next to me. Our Homeowner Protection Program, HPP Manager, Cherie Williams. Our Legislative Liaison, Josh Greenberg, and our Public Information Officer, Miles Handy, is also here with us today. Got the whole squad. We got everybody. In case any questions come up, we want to be able to answer anything we can. I appreciate your invitation here today. We certainly look forward to working with you throughout the session. As you know, there's been a change in leadership in the past year. Our goal is to be open, communicative, work with you in any way we can. That's something that we have all discussed. That's our priority. So anything that comes up, we're glad to work with you. I want to start off with something that has to do with our assessment notices. We did work extensively with our vendor this past year to simplify the notice in some ways, to make it easier for them to print the job. We instituted some new parameters for us to go out, made multiple site visits of checking notices. We put some additional checks in place for verification that everything was operating smoothly, and the notices were all printed and mailed on December 30th, so that we did get those notices out as required by law with all of them without, at least without any major problems this year. Beyond that, we are working on several things on our internal processes. You know, we're not making major changes at the agency other than at our leadership team. We are looking at making incremental changes and improving things. Some of these are minor tweaks to systems. The previous directorship was trying to move everything toward being done online. We are backing off of that. Among other things we've done is adjusted our phone system so that we're answering more calls, because we don't want people to either not get through, or we don't want them to get through and then have their calls cut off. So we made some adjustments to our phone systems to do that. We are implementing some additional changes to better inform the public when they apply for homeowners and homestead tax credits. One of the things we're doing on the homeowners tax credits is sending a letter. If someone does not apply online, our intent this year is to send a letter to applicants that we have received their application, and then as soon as it's been approved, to notify them so that there's better communication between us and property owners. Those things are things that we just feel are important to serve the taxpayers of the state. So we are implementing those as means of small incremental changes to make things better for the property owners of the state. On our homestead tax credits, it's been an issue the last couple of years in that there was a backlog of applications. We have resolved that this spring, this summer. So we are up to date on those. We are processing applications as they come in. We're also in the process of implementing some new audit procedures for checking those to make sure that combat fraud, make sure that we're not having people that are getting a credit that are also have a homestead credit or a homestead where they're living out of state in particular. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Marie Smith and let her discuss HB 236 and the process we made on that.
Good evening, good afternoon, actually. I am, for the record, Marie Smith. This is also my first time. I am, thank you. I am the newly appointed state ombudsman, newly 3 months or so. But anyway, I'd like to talk to you, begin about House Bill 236, which was passed in 2023. This bill requires the department to find and contact homeowners who are in tax sale and to conduct outreach to offer them services that our department can assist them with, and also other jurisdiction services that they may have that could assist them. The bill requires us to conduct methods of outreach other than by mail and requires all agencies in state and local government to provide our office any contact information they have upon request. To support this outreach, the department has hired 2 additional staff members for outreach, and we have met with several partners to establish a protocol for information sharing. We've already initiated our outreach based on the 2024 tax sale list and plan to complete outreach before the 2025 tax sale season. Next up is Sherry Williams, who is our Homeowners Protection Program Manager.
Good afternoon. As stated, I am Sherry Williams, the Homeowners Protection Program Manager, and I too am newly appointed as of August. I bet. Thank you so much. Now moving on to House Bill 16, which passed last session. The department will now be offering an online donation portal that will allow Marylanders to contribute funds directly to support the Homeowners Protection Program. While we sought to contract with a vendor, we found that due to its existing programs do not fit the specific requirements of this bill. Furthermore, adding this functionality to existing software may take up to 6 months to implement. The department has met with vendors with ease of mind and use, and we believe that we will have identified a vendor who can accomplish this task within a few weeks. And we are meeting with a vendor on Friday, so hopefully this will be implemented really soon. Thank you. And I pass the torch to our Deputy Director.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Yeager. I'm the newly appointed Deputy Director of SDAT. Nice to see you all.
We did this all
again.
for the applause. So.
Right. House Bill 54, which also passed in the last session, has been the most complex procurement by far. As this committee may be aware, no other program like this exists in state government. We've spoken to several vendors and agencies across multiple jurisdictions to determine how to achieve the best results from our implementation. Just a reminder, this is a program that would allow property owners to enter into a payment plan to pay their property taxes, and that would be facilitated through a vendor that SDAT would contract with. The bill is clear that this program would be self-funded, and the vendor would be paid through reasonable fees that are passed on to the enrollee. And the department takes full responsibility for its implementation. So last year we started the implementation by working with our procurement team and the Department of Information Technology. After an extensive review of the program considerations and DO-IT's contracting resources, DO-IT determined that no current programs can accommodate these requirements, and they advised us that we would need to put out an RFP to procure this service. We further developed the detailed operational considerations as well as privacy and monitoring requirements. And finally, we drafted our RFP and submitted it to Do-It. So where we are now, currently Do-It's technical drafters are working to make sure the RFP request meets technical requirements and the state's security and programmatic requirements. To give the committee a sense of the timeline, once drafting and technical corrections are completed and the RFP has been approved by Do-It and the Office of State Procurement, the RFP must be published for 45 days. Based on the responses to the RFP, if we have a number of bids, we can move to the selection process. If we have a lot of questions from vendors, we may hold a conference to provide clarifications, and this may result in additional bids, or it may result in modifications to the RFP and then a republishing of the RFP. After that time, all bid proposals are reviewed by our procurement team, after which Do-It and OSP must approve the award. Once we've selected a vendor, the Board of Public Works may also be needed to approve the award if the amount of the procurement exceeds $200,000. The vendor's timeline for becoming operational and filling any SSTAT staffing needs will determine when the program can go live. So while the timeline is certainly longer than we would like, this is the best way to ensure that we are protecting the privacy and security of potential enrollees in the program while also introducing a robust program that remains faithful to the General Assembly's vision. So thank you very much for inviting us to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question I have is the tax sales, have you seen them increase over the year? The amount of tax sales that are being looked at?
You mean have the tax sales increased from last year to the next?
Correct.
I'll kick that over to our tax sale ombudsman.
I would have to look at the exact figures. I think they're about similar. They looked in line, a little bit lower.
So per statute, we conduct an annual tax sale survey each year. Last year's survey was conducted at the end of the summer, and the numbers that we got from the counties are published in our online annual report. We can take a look at that versus the ones from the year before. I believe they were relatively similar to so the report that we got, the survey results that we got from the counties in November were based on the 2023 tax sales. So we have the numbers for that, and we can compare that to the 2022 tax sales. We've just put out our annual survey this year, and that is collecting data from the counties for the 2024 tax sale season. So we can get back to you with the comparison. But my understanding is they're relatively similar.
Okay, I was just going to say, I actually did some investigation as far as what's happening in the real estate market. I'm a real estate broker by trade. One thing I see, there's a trend of people actually not refinancing, but doing mortgage, what do you call it?
Refinance?
No, where you refinance, not refinance, where you go in and you redo your mortgages. They put the payments on the end.
Modification.
Modifications, loan modifications. For some reason, it keeps skipping out of my brain. That's a bad sign. When you start seeing the numbers jump up, that people are having to do loan modifications, because that means that people are behind on their payments. That's scary. The other thing is, I'd like to ask, have you talked to the lenders, the banks? If once this program that you have, we want to have implemented, as far as start making payments, how will that work with the banks? Because the banks are going to worry about their interest in it for tax sales. Have you guys worked that out yet?
So anyone who has their property tax payments escrowed would not be able to be part of this program, this HB 54 program. That's part of the law that was passed.
Is there any way we can possibly modify that? Because I'll be honest with you, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. That's my personal opinion.
We defer to the wisdom of the General Assembly. This was not a departmental initiative, so if that's something you guys want to discuss, we'd be happy to weigh in. We would definitely have some operations.
One last question, Madam Chair. Do you see that being a problem? Let's say someone's behind on their mortgages, on their mortgage payments, they're behind on their taxes. Do you see that problem with them interacting with the state as far as going in for payments?
So there would be operational concerns that we can go through in more detail offline. Broadly, the way that this current program works is sort of in the form of a loan. So it would be likely some sort of financial institution that would pay the full amount of the property taxes to the county, and then they would have an agreement with the enrollee to pay once a month over 12 months, say. When the property tax payments are mortgaged or held in escrow, that usually means that the enrollee already has some agreement with some financial institution to pay those taxes in installments. So there would be a conflict there that we would probably need to work out, but again, happy to talk further.
I would love to talk about that, because what you're saying is the program that we implemented last year is basically only for homeowners that don't have mortgages. Am I correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Or if they have a mortgage where they're not escrowing their property taxes.
Okay. One last question, if I might. How much do you use the weight of appraisals for properties that are sold for reassessment? Do you have a formula, what you use that, and as far as actually, do you have another way of looking at actual value of a property?
With all of the assessments, we are looking at recent sales, and we are using a sales comparable approach for residential type properties. So we're looking at the properties that have actually sold, and we're using that information to compare to the properties that have not and evaluating them. So it's very similar to a private appraisal, but we typically don't see a private appraisal. If you do a loan and you have your property appraised, we typically don't see that unless you're appealing your assessment, in which case you might provide that to us, and we will consider that in any appeal.
Right.
But we are doing the very similar approach of looking at properties that have actually sold in neighborhoods and using that information to appraise all the properties that are reassessed.
Do you have any other ways that you could do assessments besides using the appraisal approach? Do you have any other mechanisms or protocol in place where if you didn't have the appraisals, that you could do the assessment in a different direction?
Well, we're doing the assessment.
Right.
Our local offices are doing that assessment by looking at those comparable sales. We do look at multiple approaches, just like any appraiser. So we might be looking at gross rent multipliers as an appraisal method. We might be looking at an income approach, a capitalization of income approach, where we're looking at, for commercial properties, what the income to the real estate is, and capitalizing that, because that's the way that most of those properties are sold in the marketplace, are using the income that's attributable to the property. So we use all those approaches when we're doing the valuation. And then ultimately, we use a depreciated cost approach if we have no other information available, which is simply looking at what's the replacement cost of the property minus any physical, functional, economic obsolescence.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So it's really good to hear you mention in your presentation around just the process of sending out a letter of receival for individuals that are applying for the various tax credits. And then as a consumer, I do enjoy receiving those type of letters because it lets me know that it was received, but nothing feels better than when you actually receive the benefit itself, right? And I know a lot of folks I've spoken to in my district, from directly residents, as well as some of the organizations that help individuals apply for those various tax credits, homeowners and rental. They're just expressing how there's still significant delay in the time from receiving that letter or submitting their application to actually receiving the benefit. And so I'm wondering if anyone could speak about what are some of the solutions, what is causing the delay, and what is the conversation around solutions to reduce that delay in receiving those resources, because people really are, they need their money basically, right? They benefit from those resources. So can anyone speak to what you all are looking at in terms of solutions to address the backlog and the severe delay in the time that it takes to receive those credits?
Let me address first of all that there are two different credits we're talking about. The homestead property tax credit, which limits any increases in the taxable assessment. Those applications, we have eliminated any backlog. We're processing them in real real time. Property owners buy a property, they submit an application, we're processing it. The biggest holdup on that for us is typically waiting for the owners to change their driver's license so that their driver's license records reflect they're living in the home. That's actually one of our biggest holdups, but that's up to the property owner for those homestead credits. I think probably what you're referring to mostly is the homeowner's tax credits, which are income-based. We have an online system for applying for that, which greatly helps, but the majority of those homeowners, they fill out and they send in a paper application. All that information has to be keyed in their computer systems, so it's a labor-intensive process at this time, but that's the way we get probably 80% of those applications. So we truly are having people look at them, enter all the data, do the calculations to see if they qualify. One of the things we're putting in is simply letting them know that they do qualify for the credit. We can't calculate that until the counties actually set their tax rates, because it's based on the assessment compared to with the tax rate to see what the actual tax bill would be, minus anything that they qualify for based on their income. So there's always that delay, and that is a hardship because people want to know how much the credits are going to get, but it can't be calculated until that time. Typically, we don't get the tax rates from the local jurisdiction set until June. So even if somebody applies in February, March, we can't tell them that until until we get those rates calculated.
That's fair. So, but I'm also curious though, in terms of if you know, because you shared two things. There's the part that's on the responsibility of the county, and there's the verification process, especially if a lot of folks are submitting in paper. And so I'm curious, like, how long does that verification process take? So let's take the county out of it, right? But how long on average does it take to process an application? And I'll be easy on you and say someone who was responsive. So if someone needs to re-verify something and they're very responsive which is on like the short end, how long does it take an average application to be approved or to be verified where you have a responsive individual and there aren't delays on the part of the applicant?
I believe we typically say it's a 45-day process for us to get the information that's mailed in, get the information added, audited, or entered in our systems to get then checked to see what they qualify for, and if they qualify, do any follow-up and verifying that. So that's what we say is typical. Some of them are quicker because some of them are simpler. Others are more complex. But that's typically what we say is it's normally a 45-day period for the whole process.
And then just for the more context, so once that process takes place in terms of the verification, if you factor in what you mentioned about the county, on average, how long does it take for the county to and I know that every county can vary, right? But I'm curious, like, give me an estimate of the time of year in which those are set. Because I have people who are commenting that they have applied, like in March of 2024, they applied and they have not received theirs yet, right? So I'm just curious, like what, because we're all trying to find solutions to, to make sure that we can provide the resources that people are expecting. So I'm curious, like if you're waiting for a county to set it and they do it as they're supposed to, ideally, in a perfect world, when would that happen?
Right now, state law dictates that they have to set the rates prior to July 1 for that July 1 tax year. So we typically get those rates from the counties, some of them as early as the last week of May, some of them the third week of June when we get those. Once we get those, we calculate the credits, and anybody that applies by April 15th, when we calculate that credit is already calculated and applied to their tax bill when we send the billing files to the counties. Okay. So if they've applied by April 15th, their credit's reflected on their tax bill when they get it. If they apply after that date, then typically they end up having to be reimbursed directly to the property owner. If you have somebody that says that they've applied that long ago, I certainly would like to hear who it is so that we
Okay.
can verify that, to make sure that there's not some piece of information that we need that's not been provided. But because they should not be that long to be processed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to send anybody you have my way, and I'd be more than happy to have it
Absolutely.
taken care of.
I have one more question. I could ask more on this, but I can sidebar with you all. I do have one more question with regard to agriculture. I know that there had been like a long-running dispute about reassessing agriculture property as commercial instead of ag. And so I'm curious, I know that there's been engagement with the Department of Ag on this. And I think that SSTAT was going to be working around creating a more modernized definition of ag. So I'm wondering if folks are familiar with this process on your team. I see my colleagues shaking their heads, but if anyone on your team is familiar with this process, if not, would love to get some follow-up with you about where you are in that deliberation with the Department of Ag.
Well, I can tell you, I've met with Secretary Addix about this. I also was in the work group that was run by the Senate, work group that I participated in that. And I also, the year before that, did the study that was done, with the various parties. And we issued a joint report to the legislature on that, from that study. So I've been involved deeply with that.
Good.
Generally, what it is it's not, when I say reassessing or changing into commercial assessments, or there are definitions that are optional in state legislature that say for different types of things that apply, but they are optional definitions that the counties can adopt. They are not set statewide as being in place. So some jurisdictions have adopted those, others have not, as far as what their definition of agriculture is. For our purposes, COMAR has always been, it's been geared toward production of crops, livestock, those activities. And that's what our COMAR regulations are revolving around. The question becomes when something is placed on the property that is not growing crops, it's an activity that may be considered commercial in nature, in which case that part of the property is typically not receiving an agricultural use assessment. If you put a retail operation there, just like somebody else might be in town selling produce, it's going to be, for the most part, going to be changed in that. It is somewhat subjective, I will tell you that, based on the opinion, because with any property, when you're looking at appraisal and assessment, we're looking at the highest and best use, and what is, does it have a significant impact on the property? And so for farm properties, someone putting a small stand out to sell produce in July and August when it's coming off doesn't significantly alter the value of the property. On the other hand, I've seen things where somebody goes in and puts a 25,000 square foot retail building in, and they're selling everything, including lawn furniture. And that's not necessarily considered an agricultural operation.
I appreciate that. I think it would just be good. I think there's folks that are really interested in whenever the final product could be released in terms of what that new assessment will look like. But I appreciate all the work you're doing on this. Thank you.
Well, I will tell you, I did go to the Farm Bureau Conference this fall and sat in on some of their meetings on the value-added agriculture, to meet with groups of property owners. So we're
Delegate
working on that.
Palakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the information today. I wanted to ask about language access, because we know there's a lot of diversity in Maryland in terms of languages that people speak primarily. And I'll say I've heard from some constituents who, for instance, Spanish speakers who've had some issues with the department. And I'm wondering, can you just speak about, for particularly some of the property tax credits we've been speaking to, are any of those applications available in Spanish? And I do appreciate the fact that the department is taking more telephone calls. And can you also just clarify, are you opted into the state contract that allows for the telephonic translation services? I think there's a contract that's available for state agencies.
I would have to get back to you on whether or not we're involved in that contract. I know that one of the things that we have been discussing, and we have not done yet, that's the goal is to have the documents, the applications available in other languages. Getting the translations done is not necessarily easy, but that is something that is a goal of ours. But it takes time to do that, and we've not gotten that done at this time.
You can follow up on the phone translation services too. Thank you.
Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today for the briefing. It was encouraging to hear that you have the homestead tax credit thing fixed. That, because I know it was under the old leadership, it was like 6 or 8 months, maybe even longer. So good work in that. Speaking with I think it was the previous leadership, talked about the low salaries and the inability to attract proper talent that you need. Having had 2 tax appeal hearings yesterday, I'm concerned that maybe some of that still exists. Can you tell me, if there's been any work as far as, is that getting better, or do you feel like you're getting the right talent now and able to retain them?
There's definitely been improvement. Among other things, there was an annual salary review that affected our assessor staff last year that was approved. So that has been an increase in salaries that was funded by the governor's budget. With that in place, it certainly has helped us. We've, in our recruitment and our retention, the last vacancy report that we had department-wide, we were down below 6%. Which I was thrilled with, because we had been in some of our, particularly in some of our assessor positions, we had 20 to 25% vacancies in some of them. And we are at the point where we are under 10% vacancies in those. So that's been a tremendous help in us recruiting people, retaining people, our employees. We are working on implementing some additional training methods. As we all go into AI, we've been working with some of our processes and our procedures of having AI evaluate those procedures and summarize them. One of the things just for our staff at this point, but we intend to do some of this on our website too, to summarize these reports, because very often people don't want to read through lengthy things. It's very often easier to teach them using a audiovisual component instead of having somebody read through various procedures. So that's something that we've started working on right now. We have a training manager that's working with our real property team, and he's very good with that. And that's one of the things we're working on to better train our employees.
That may lead into my next question, but hopefully if we've given an increase across the board, hopefully that means, to me, it means we're overpaying some of those incompetent people as opposed to. So that's concerning on that side, but glad to hear that you're filling those vacancies and hopefully with the right people. I texted you yesterday at an appeal. I asked if I could record the appeal hearing, and I was told no. The assessor got very upset with even the thought of that and absolutely refused. Texted you to ask what the policy was, and you said that the assessor should allow for video, taping or whatever, and also that they should be recording that first line appeal assessment or whatever. What are you doing to ensure the consistency of the experience across the state, whether it's in Worcester County or Westminster or wherever? What's happening so that no matter where you go on a regular basis, the office staff understand? To me, that's a pretty simple procedure. What are you doing to ensure the same experience?
Well, in any of those cases, number one, they should be following our standard procedures. We already had a written procedure stating that they should have allowed that hearing. In this particular case, I know you notified me. We did review that procedure. Actually, we made a few modifications to expand it yesterday because it had not addressed when we did video hearings and telephone hearings. So we went through to make sure that we're complying with all laws to allow those hearings to be recorded by the property owners, we should also record those ourselves. But we revised that procedure yesterday. We have sent that out to all of our county offices to make sure that they're aware of that. I'll be honest with you, there's always going to be some personnel issues, I mean, that we have to deal with, and those are personnel matters that we address internally. But we currently have a team of area supervisors that work in a real property division. These are people who have been former supervisors of assessments, that they work with a group of typically 8 counties, that they work with the supervisors there to ensure that they are complying with everything. Once again, if we hear that somebody is not complying with any of our standard procedures, we want to know about that.
So in the future, should I expect a recording of a first line appeal? Because I think it would be
Absolutely, you
helpful
should be able to
because
do that.
there's so much information that when they have to go back and review that, so much could be missed, and detail is, a big thing. And so, hopefully that's the case.
Right. We certainly, our official procedure is that we allow that recording.
Okay. Now,
And they should have allowed that when you were there. We do like to have a supervisor there typically because we don't have separate recording equipment, but each of our supervisors is assigned a government phone that they can use to record those hearings.
when you file the appeal, you have the option of requesting information like the list of comparable properties and so forth. So when I went in, I had the list. I said, can you tell me which of these properties you feel are comparable that you use for the valuation? Assessor said, I don't know what's there. I don't look at it. Wouldn't address or answer that question. Then he asked if I had actual appraisals done at my expense, which could be over $1,000 each. My thought is that commercial assessor would have the same qualifications as a property. Somebody doing a commercial paid for property appraisal. Wouldn't that be true that they'd have the same qualifications?
They really, while we train them and give them things, they do not have the exact same qualifications. I happen to hold a certified general appraisal license in the state of Maryland.
So not all assessors are
But they are not
commercial.
required to be licensed, and there are probably 6 of us statewide that have appraisal licenses.
How about not licensed, but trained to that same caliber? Is there even any of that?
They do train extensively. I don't know that they're not going to go to the same level of being an MII or.
So is there any thought to that list, or is it just something to check the box? I mean, is it just, we just print something out and we apply, conform to the law? Is there anything relevant in that list to our property?
There should be. And
Interesting.
I'm not happy to hear what you're saying about that particular individual.
Last question. There's a policy that I learned about in-house kind of, that if within 3 years a property has to be assessed at 95 to 99% of the value of the property. Market conditions can change, and that may be a good rule, in a kind of a relatively calm market and maybe in residential, but in commercial, especially if we're dealing triple net properties where a property can be tied up for 40 years from a lease, an original lease and options and so forth. Market conditions can change very quickly. Cap rates are very much tied to interest rates and lending rates. And you can have huge fluctuation, unfortunately, within a 3-year period. The assessment comes out saying this is the fair value, but you have a policy dictating otherwise that has to be 95 to 99%. And fair value is clearly disregarded. And I was, told it doesn't matter. This is our policy. Help me understand why that policy is in place. And, if that's really true that policy exists.
The policy is that we on average are looking for a 95 to 98% ratio for properties that have sold. That being said, that's on an average for a neighborhood, for a given area. Individual properties may vary. They may be below or above that because the marketplace is not always as consistent as all of us would like. So there may be, on average, you can say that might be 80% of the properties are in that 95 to 98% ratio, but there may be something specific about another house that sold for below or above that, and that should be reflected based on what they sold for. It should not, everything shouldn't be forced into that 95 to 98% ratio. There's always going to be, with any standard bell curve, any statistic, it's going to be some outliers there that they sold for that amount of money, and that's what they're worth. You're not going to be able to force those into that 95% ratio.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing. It sounds like there's still more work to do even with that.
There always is.
95 to 99% rule, because I think it's being interpreted as a hard, fast policy. And, maybe there needs to be an understanding that it's a guideline and not a hard, fast policy, because it may eliminate some problems and appeals.
Right.
So, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Delegate Attar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Deputy Yeager. It's about House Bill 54. So I know you said the timeline, it varies and it's based on a lot of stuff. Can you give an estimate? Are we talking about 4 months, 2 years?
I would say the outside estimate would be within fiscal year 26. So right now, if you sort of walk it through the RFP, say we get it back from Department of Information Technology by the end of this month, it's posted for 45 days. If we have questions, we're expecting, honestly, a lot of questions, because the vendors we've spoken with already have a lot of questions on how this works operationally. So we've tried to put as many details into the RFP as possible. So what that'll mean is we'll probably have a conference where we have all the interested bidders, where we answer their questions and then potentially modify the RFP. Then it would go back out for another 45 days. So I'm not adding this up, but at that point, once we get to the point where we have a bidder and that bidder's been approved, if their bid says, yes, we're going to have the reasonable fee, but we also need SDAT to have an upfront cost of $500,000, something over $200,000, then it would have to go to the Board of Public Works for approval. That could take some time. Once that's approved, though, and we have access to those funds, we can, execute that contract and then start the process. As we move through that process, when we find out what aspects of the operation are going to be covered by the vendor, we'll know what pieces of that SDAT has to fill in terms of staffing. For example, we would like, I think in the spirit of the bill, to have the vendor handle most components of this, where SDAT is really just in a monitoring role. But with vendors we've spoken with, they may want SDAT to field all of the application process, and they may want SDAT to handle all the calls and emails and all the inquiries about that. And they would want us to handle a lot of the pieces of it that we would like the vendor to handle. So if that is the contract that we end up with, we would have to hire staff and train them and get them in place. We can do that relatively quickly. But with all those steps, it could happen sooner, but I would want to give us enough time in case there are bumps along the way. By the end of fiscal year 26, that would be June of next year.
So those who would be eligible for this, the process is still continuing with them with their homes going towards tax sale?
So the homeowner protection program is operational right now, and the ombudsman's office is also has been in place for several years. So anyone who's at risk of tax sale, we can help them. We want to find them. We connect them with resources. We connect them with tax credits. If it's appropriate, we can help them enroll in the homeowner protection program, which is a loan program. That's all available right now. The HB 54 bill is a separate program that was passed in the last session, and that would be open to any property owner. Any owner-occupied property owner, regardless of income, regardless of assessed value of the property. And this is just a tool that would allow property owners to enroll in a payment plan rather than paying that semi-annual payment.
Okay.
It's a much broader program, but it's really, we're specifically mandated to find a vendor to provide that service for us. And I think the idea was that the cost of the vendor would be passed on to the enrollee with a reasonable fee. But in our initial discussions, we've spoken with some vendors that would not be candidates for this because we have to follow procurement rules. And the vendors have said to us that they wouldn't anticipate a vendor not expecting some sort of upfront compensation and potentially an annual compensation on top of the fees that they would pass on to the consumers. So that's all the details that would play out through the procurement process as we
Got it,
investigate.
okay, thank you.
Okay, sure.
The Vice Chair. Delegate Griffith. Oh, do you have,
No, I turned it off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Delegate Griffith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Just a quick question. I know in the past there's been some friction between SDAT and county governments. Can you talk about some of the steps that you've taken to keep some of the county elected officials in the loop?
Certainly. I will tell you that when we meet with our staff, we are very explicit that, we have really two customer bases of clients. We have the property owners of the state of Maryland that we need to be fair to, and we have local government, be it towns, cities, county governments. And we need to work with those. Actually, Bob and I went yesterday and we spoke with MACO, with their finance officers. We work with them. We've, have told them that if they need information, we provide that to them. We are making every effort to make sure that they have the information they need from us, because they are our, really our biggest clients in many ways, and that all the information that we do, all the assessments we do, all the business personal property assessments, it all goes to, the county is using that for everything. So we are making every effort to make sure that they are a part of it, they have the information they need. I think Thursday, you're doing the tax affinity group meeting, that we regularly attend these meetings with county, particularly the finance officials. But at any time that the county, the mayors, the county councils, if they meet, have any questions, we are always making ourselves available to them to make sure they have the information that they need.
Thank you.
Delegate Feldmark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this briefing, and I've really enjoyed sort of the conversation, your answers to some of my colleagues' questions. And I wanted to follow up actually on Delegate Wells' questions about timing and the delays in the homeowners tax credit and the renters tax credit. I think you said the time, assuming a responsive applicant, the time would be about 45 days for the application and approval process, correct? And for the homeowners tax credit, then that would be reflected on their next property tax bill. Right. For the renters tax credit, once an application is approved, what is a reasonable expectation of actually receiving the credit? Since that's, on the renter side, it's an actual payment.
Right.
That would be 90 days, is that correct?
90 days? Okay.
90 days from when the application is approved to when the check should get to the applicant.
Wonderful, thank you. And I do want to say, I personally have only had a small number of constituents reach out to me with specific complaints, and the department has always been responsive and helpful in getting those resolved when I've reached out. So I do want to thank you for that. And recently, in conversations with some of the nonprofits and advocates working on these issues, I was disappointed to hear sort of a much higher level of frustration and concern from the clients that they're working with, including to the point that some of them have sort of given up and are not applying anymore. And so that's particularly disheartening to me, because when we think about folks who are applying for a homeowner's tax credit and the renter's tax credit, these are our neighbors with the greatest need, and this is something that they are entitled to and have a right to this relief. So I don't know if that's new information to you, if you've heard this before, that that there's this level of frustration that folks are actually giving up on trying, and if you have thoughts on sort of addressing that and rebuilding that trust, or can we convene you with some of these nonprofits to figure out how to address that?
We absolutely believe, I mean, everybody that should be able to get the credit, it's a duty for us to do it, to make sure that they can apply, that they can be processed promptly. I will say that the outreach, trying to reach renters, is very difficult. I mean, we send out postcards to apartment complexes, to occupants, and throughout things, but that's a hard reach to reach them. They don't get us our assessment notices. We have that outreach program, but that's something that having community organizations help with it is probably something that we need to consider working with them in partnership, because the current outreach is just very difficult. When we send out those several 100,000 postcards, and we're hoping they reach somebody. And they go out whether the people might qualify or not to those complexes. The homeowners tax credits, I'm really not happy about that you're saying that people are saying that they're frustrated with that process. I will say that our previous leadership team, they wanted to direct everything online. They didn't like having to deal with personal interactions, and I just don't believe that's the way we should operate in this state. Our goal is to serve the taxpayers, and that's why we've made efforts to make sure that we have no dropped calls, that people can talk to somebody by expanding our call center and our answering. We want to make sure that they get responsiveness. Why we've implemented the program to send out just an acknowledgement that someone has sent in an application and that we finished processing it, because there was too many senior citizens that we have that don't have computer access. They don't want to do things online. I will tell you that at one point with the previous administration, we were told not to assist people in the local office if they came in with filling out an application. We've reversed that. I just can't have somebody that has owned this property for an X amount of time and comes in and asks for our help and not help them. And we've instructed our offices to do that, because they deserve it. So if there's something that you have that you feel can help with that, we're open to suggestions. We've done a recent reorganization of our tax credit team to try what we feel will be better serve the property owners in getting things processed promptly, along with still maintaining our audit functions to make sure that everything is, that we're not having any fraud. I do know that we get a lot of frustration, as we've gone along. The income limit on those tax credits has been established a long time ago, and we get people that year after year that used to get a credit, and now because their Social Security's increased or things that they're now outside the income limits and no longer qualify. And that's frustrating for them, because their other household expenses have gone up. But that's a legislative issue. I'm just explaining what some of the things that we hear from property owners and have experienced.
And just to add on to that, Delegate, I'm more than happy to connect with you or your staff to meet with the people that you've been talking to, deal with any constituent issues directly, but also any of these organizations that you're speaking with, to hear their concerns, because we are always happy to work with our partners to try to figure out how we can do things better.
Thank you. And my last question is, I think these issues really point to the need to make these tax credit programs more user-friendly. And as you may recall, for a few years, I tried with legislation to streamline that process and get some coordination with the comptroller's office, where much of this information is already being submitted when individuals submit their income taxes. Under prior leadership, there was not a lot of appetite for that collaboration. Is that something we might
Absolutely. We have gotten access to this is something we've worked with this summer, is getting access to the comptrollers database. They've given us access to that to verify income for people. So that is something we've actually got in place this past summer and are currently doing. So we are working with them to get information.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Currently.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Phillips and the team for this presentation. I wanted to go back to the notice of assessment. I have seen a lot in the news and online with constituents and residents concerned around the notices that they received, and I received a few inquiries from constituents as well. I do appreciate that you mentioned the attempt to improve the notices, and that should be commended. But I am hearing feedback that we still have a bit of work to do to help to ensure that it's clear, that it's in plain language, and that residents really understand why their assessments have been increased. And in particular, I wanted to better understand the type of information that we provide that helps a resident to understand the types of improvements that were made that has caused their assessment and their improvements value to increase, the factors that are behind their land market value, and if we can include that type of detailed information to help explain why these increases are occurring for our constituents. Are you going to be making further improvements and taking feedback when it comes to these notices?
We always are welcome feedback and questions. I mean, with these, I mean, the legislation tax property article outlines certain things that have to be included in the notices. So that's where we start from. Actually, one of these things in the law says that we shall break out the value between the land value, improvements, and the total. We actually use that in the language this year, and we've gotten a lot of questions of people about what improvements did I make? And, you know, we use the term in the law, and I think that, you know, that was probably a mistake. We should have just, you know, called them structures instead of improvements. You know, but by trying to comply, by following the way the legislation is written in the law, it kind of created a problem for us. But we've already identified that. We're going to change that for next year. Our in-house notices that were also reformatted to have the same layout as the general reassessment notices for when we do people do new construction, build new houses, and they get an adjustment. We've already made the change in the forms for those going out to make sure that it's clear. One of the things that's included that on page, it's really the third page of the notice, is an explanation of each of those fields. So it says improvements are dwellings, commercial buildings, swimming pools, you know, different things. Unfortunately, people don't tend to read those, but it's included in the notice to explain what is included in those items. Very often, people may not have done anything as far as truly to their house other than routine maintenance, and the changes are strictly based on changes in the real estate market, and that's the majority of those properties. Because otherwise, if someone does a major renovation of the house, anything that changes the value by more than $100,000 because they've done an addition or a renovation, they actually receive a mid-cycle notice for that new construction, that change in, that's required under state law if it changes the value by over $100,000 from something that they've truly improved the property. Changes that occur because of the marketplace, those are reflected all in our assessment notices. Even if it goes up over $100,000, that still is phased in over the 3-year period and subject to any homestead tax credit caps.
Thank you so much. Is there a generic copy of the assessment? I'm not sure if we have a copy of it, but I would just be curious to take a look at it.
We can certainly send you that.
Okay, perfect. I'd appreciate that.
We've done in the past. I mean, what we'll probably do is take a notice and redact the owner's name and address.
Great.
And then send it with the rest of the information in it.
Thank
That's
you.
acceptable.
And just a final comment, I noticed here, I was looking at the email from this constituent, that you responded directly to it. So for the residents out there, you may not get a direct response from the director every time, but I do want to appreciate you and recognize you for responding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all the questions for today. So thank you, Director Phillips, and your team for being here today. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the work that you are doing for the state of Maryland. And that concludes today's briefing committee. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
everybody.
Thank you.